Two people earn the exact same income, let's say $75,000 a year, but fast forward a decade or two later and one is financially free, yet the other is still stuck in place. So why does this happen? In this video, I'm going to share with you the key differences in habits, mindset, and decision-making that determine whether someone ends up rich or broke. You will clearly see that even if you have the same income as somebody else, how your situation and life can be completely different over time. The first thing that we need to understand is that what you make is only one part of the equation of becoming rich and wealthy. Sadly, it's the one thing in our society that we tend to focus on. How much you make or your income is much more cool to brag about and hip to discuss than boring financial habits that actually lead to financial stability. This type of thinking is quite evident according to this 2024 payment study. 1/3 of people earning more than $200,000 a year reported living paycheck to paycheck, and 48% of people making over $100,000 per year live paycheck to paycheck as well. So how could that be? I mean, you would assume someone, if they make $200,000 a year, that comes out to $12,000 a month after taxes, that they would probably be financially successful and stable. After all, the average income in the United States is somewhere around $75,000. So how is it that 36% of people earning 2.5 to 3 times the average salary in the United States are in a tough financial situation where they're living paycheck to paycheck? It comes down to 3 common mistakes that lead to being broke even if you're making a decent income. Mistake number 1 is lifestyle inflation. The quickest way to sabotage any extra income you make is by ramping up your spend because you just simply can. There's a book called The Millionaire Next Door. I think it's somewhere back there that I reference here on the channel, and it was written in 1996. What the authors essentially did was study the profiles of the rich. They provided critical insights into how the richest 1% in the United States lived and what their habits were. One of the lessons of the book was that most people who are great accumulators of wealth often keep their lifestyles cheap and modest even when their income increases. Now, for me personally, I like making my coffee at home instead of paying, let's say, $5 for a latte out. And partially, there is a selfish reason for this. I like burnt drip coffee. That's my favorite style of coffee, like the kind that you get from a diner. It just kind of tastes like dirty hot water. That's particularly what I enjoy. But it also turns out to be a win-win because coffee is expensive and I drink it every day. That's one way that I like to keep my lifestyle modest. But for you, that could look different. Maybe you opt out of Spotify Premium, and maybe you don't mind listening to the ads that come on Spotify. Now, the book found that on the flip side, many people who look well off were actually to be found deeply in debt. Physicians and lawyers, for example, usually earn above average incomes, but they also tend to drive luxury cars and live in larger homes because they want to live in the same neighborhoods that their colleagues do. They can then often struggle to pay off student debt and car loans and have huge mortgages. My favorite analogy of the book is that the author likens growing your income as a fence, whereas having great defense means that you're keeping your spending low. One of the famous quotes in the book is the following: "Great offense and poor defense translate into underaccumulation of wealth." End quote. The foundation stone of wealth accumulation is defense, and this defense should be anchored by budgeting and planning. Essentially what he means is that even with a strong offense, aka a strong income, if you ruin it with poor defense, also known as spending, you aren't going to accumulate wealth as quickly. Defense is something that you should always be focused on when it comes to creating wealth. Mistake number 2, that's a really common mistake here, is having too much debt. Credit cards and loans make it easy to live beyond your means. Monthly payments on depreciating assets like cars will chip away at your future wealth as well. Now, imagine you have 2 friends. Let's call them Graham and Humphrey, and they both earn $75,000 per year. Graham, unfortunately, he's got $5,000 in credit card debt with an interest rate of 20%. To pay it off within a year, he needs to allocate about $500,000 per month toward the debt, including interest. And this leaves Graham with significantly less disposable income for saving, investing, and other expenses. Humphrey, on the other hand, my guy, he has no debt and can put the same $500 per month into the S&P 500, earning 8% per year. In just one single year, Humphrey has saved $6,000, and it's starting to grow even further due to compound interest. Now, in just that single year alone, where Graham had credit card debt and Humphrey didn't, Humphrey's $6,000 could eventually turn into over $60,000 in about 30 years. So you can see that the longer that you stretch out the time horizon, the higher impact debt will actually have on your overall net worth in the long run. You could easily see how if you and your friend both earn $75,000 per year, but one has $5,000 in credit card debt versus one person doesn't have any debt at all, what the effects are. One of the milestones you should be aiming for at all stages of your life is to have $0 in debt, besides perhaps a mortgage. And my personal opinion is that you should have your cars paid off as well. I think carrying a loan on a depreciating asset is one way in which your money will never work for you. The third common mistake I see here is the lack of tracking, budgeting, and planning when it comes to your money. It's so easy to spend frivolously without knowing the full repercussions of how much you're spending if you're not tracking it. In my early 22nd, I would go buy a sandwich down at the deli, even though the company that I work for provided lunch. I personally thought, oh, I want some variety here, but as a result, I think I tallied it up 1 month and I had spent over $150 on just eating sandwiches out when I could have easily saved that money and just ate the food that the company provided. So when I first started tracking my expenses almost 11 years ago now, I had literally zero idea how much money I was spending on every category of my life, and it turns out that humans are horrible estimators of how much they actually spend. This is especially true if you start paying for things with a credit card or a debit card. So in an MIT study using fMRI imaging, scientists examined the brain activities of subjects when they spent money with credit cards versus cash. The crazy thing is that researchers found that the credit card purchases activated a part of the brain called the striatum. I think I said that right. It's a brain region associated with reward. Regardless of price, cash purchases, on the other hand, they only triggered a very weak signal for the reward activation when that happened. The study suggests that credit cards facilitate overspending through two mechanisms. Number one, the reduced pain of payment. Because spending is now decoupled from immediate repercussions, like you don't see the cash physically leaving you, the pain of payment is actually quite small. And number two, there is some reward part of the brain that is actually activated when swiped, leading to a cycle where you might actually want to spend more money. When it came to cash, there was a weaker link for that reward activation, and there is more of a pain of paying when you're physically handing your cash over, and I will link this study down below. My point here is that it's scientifically backed that if you are swiping your card or using cashless payments, that you are probably more likely to spend money. And when it comes to the amount that we spend, we are horrible at estimating how much we've spent or we haven't spent. If you have a clear understanding of where your money is going, you won't be as likely to overspend over time. This intentionality can lead to more investing, savings, and just overall a healthier financial picture. On the other hand, somebody that doesn't know where their money is going could overspend on items, neglect their savings, and this could ultimately lead them to living paycheck to paycheck. So it really goes to show you, it's not how much you actually earn, but how you actually manage that money and how much you save. What I personally do is track my expenses on a daily basis through an app, or you can write it down, and then at the end of every month, I just summarize it on my personal Google Sheet. If you would like my free tracking template that I use on a monthly basis to track down my expenses and net worth, I will link it down below. It's completely free to get it, and I want you guys to have a better financial life this year. So make sure you grab that down below. So those are 3 common mistakes that people who are broke tend to exhibit. But now let's talk about the 3 habits that lead to wealth. And you really want to pay attention to this section if you want to get wealthy. The first is investing early. So let's pretend Graham and Humphrey again. We're back with the same example. They have the same income of $75,000 per year. Humphrey starts saving and investing at the age of 20 and invests $2,400 per year for 10 years from the ages of 20 to 30 years old. Graham, on the other hand, Man, he goes and parties in his 20s, he binges all-you-can-eat sushi, and he has enough iced coffees to the point where he's living paycheck to paycheck in his 20s. But then Graham turns 30, and he realizes, man, I got to get my life together. So he starts to save and invest $2,400 a year for the next 35 years. So who makes more money by the age of 65? Humphrey only saved for 10 years from the ages of 20 to 30, but Graham saved from the ages of 30 to 65. Well, the results will shock you. As you can see here, Humphrey contributed only $24,000 total, versus Graham contributed $84,000 over the course of his life. But yet, because of the 10-year head start, it was Humphrey who still had the higher ending balance. That's the power of compounding when it comes to time. Great accumulators of wealth know this, and this is an example of how, even if you have the same income as somebody else, how you could end up with way more money than them in the long run. Imagine Graham just never invested at all in his life. By the time he was 65, he would have nothing to show for it, while Humphrey would have over $630,000, all from an initial contribution of $24,000 in his 20 seconds. Habit number 2 that leads to wealth is to pay yourself first. So the biggest trap is that for many people, money will enter their lives, they think they can spend all of that money, and then after they spend it all, they have nothing to show for it. An example of this might be somebody with a checking account balance that always reverts back to the same number every 2 weeks. Say somebody keeps $2,500 in their checking accounts, and they get paid $1,500 for their paycheck. At the end of 2 weeks, you check in on them, and guess what their checking account balance is at $2,500 again. So instead, whenever you get paid, the first thing that you should do is to just set aside a certain percentage of that paycheck for your future self. Perhaps you get paid $1,500 every 2 weeks, and you set aside $250 first. That way, you know for certain that at least you have $250 per paycheck that you are going to save and invest for later. I know that this is a very tiny habit, but like everything with personal finance, tiny habits will lead to incredible results over time. Habit number 3 of somebody who ends up rich is that they focus on assets and not liabilities. Wealthy people prioritize spending money on things that make them money or generate more value than they put into it over time. For example, stocks, real estate, or starting a business. These are assets that can all provide cash flow. Dividend stocks can pay regular payments just for you owning them, or a rental property could produce rental income. This type of cash flow can then be reinvested or used to cover your expenses to grow your overall wealth. Liabilities, on the other hand, drain money from your wallet. So think about making a car payment. A car is a typically depreciating asset, which means that it loses value over time. In addition, if you have a car loan, you're paying interest on the car loan itself. That means you are literally paying principal and interest in order to pay off a car that is literally going down in value over time. It sounds like a really bad deal to me, so you could easily see how if 2 people had the same income, if one person focuses more on cars, luxury goods, or other items that depreciate, they could end up with a lot less in net worth. And someone who saves their money and buys an asset that appreciates over time. Okay, so we've covered a lot of the habits that result in financial consequences down the line. But one thing that should be talked about more is the psychology around money. Because the truth is, personal finance and psychology go hand in hand. One of the ways that psychology manifests itself in our beliefs about money comes from our mindset. So let's compare 2 people again with the same income. However, let's say one person has a scarcity mindset and the other has an abundance mindset about money. The person with a scarcity mindset might have a constant worry about money, feeling anxious about running out of it even when there is enough. When approached about investing their money, their instincts will tell them to hold on to the money they do have and not risk it by investing, because taking on a risk is a surefire way for them to lose it. So instead, they sit on their cash, keeping it under a mattress, even though their logic is slightly irrational, and a lot of you watching right now might feel this way, especially if you have immigrant parents. So in my life personally, my dad came to America without any money, and he's maintained a scarcity mindset around money his entire life. But I don't blame him for it. I mean, He grew up during a period of war and occupation, and it became ingrained in him that he should hoard the resources he did have because he had already lost it once before. This eventually translated into him not taking as many calculated risks as he probably could have, and it currently stops him from enjoying his life, even though he's well into his older years and probably has enough money to live out his life. In addition, I didn't know this at the time, but that type of mindset was passed down silently to me, and it's something that I've been personally trying to work on my entire life in order to shift to a more abundant mindset around money. Now, sometimes with this mindset, the opposite can also occur. People may feel so stressed that they often spend their money on short-term, immediate gratification in order to manage that stress. So they might actually eat out more often than not and buy unnecessary items now in the fear that they're not going to have any money in the future. So both of these are flaws in this mindset, but now let's actually compare the scarcity mindset to someone who's more abundant. Someone with an abundance mindset firmly believes that there is enough money to go around now and that in the future more money can always be made. As a result, they invest their money now, not for the fear of it going down, but because they see money as a tool to grow their wealth and build a better future. Instead of dwelling on limitations, they might use their money as a tool to invest in themselves. Perhaps they learn new skills or they pursue side projects. This could look like somebody investing, let's say, $3,000 or $5,000 into one of those live events that they attend to better themselves, and that could be viewed as a waste of money to other people. However, to that person investing that amount of money with an abundant mindset, they know that there's going to be some ROI on their investment. These people are more likely to save for their long-term goals, recognizing that if they sacrifice some of their short-term gratification today, it will lead to compounding wealth later on. This success builds confidence, further reinforcing the belief and the potential for growth, and then it becomes a virtuous cycle. I think this difference is just another way that two people with the same income could either end up rich or broke. Okay, so if you're watching this video and you want to end up like the rich person and not the broke one, let's consider the following practical first steps that you can take. Number 1, make a plan. Always start with a budget. Just like if you were an architect trying to build a bridge, you can't accidentally just stumble into building an amazing suspension bridge. You need a plan or a blueprint to build that bridge. And the same goes for your finances. Once you have some sort of plan or budget written down, you can start allocating money where it needs to go, and having a plan is basically the first step in doing all of this. The second step is to not have any consumer debt. So if you do have it, considering paying this off first and foremost. When you don't have payments on debt, you're going to have more money to work with that you can actually use to save and invest. And that brings me to step number 3. Rich people actually save and invest. They make a plan for it and they do it purposely. It's no accident that they become rich. They guarantee and they make sure that they actually invest so that their money can start to work for them. And lastly, step number 4, my favorite step of the day, is to live on less than you make. You should understand by now that one of the biggest ways to erode your wealth is to give in to lifestyle inflation. Every rich person knows that they need to live on way less than they make in order to invest and save the difference. I've said this already today, but it's really not about how much you earn. It's about what you do with it that matters. And it's also the mindset that you have to have around money in order to be successful. Ultimately, I believe that mastering personal finance is more about mastering yourself rather than doing crazy math calculations or forecasts or optimizations with your credit card points. Even though that can be fun sometimes, I think that the more that we understand our own habits, psychology, and behavior, the more control that we have over our own destiny. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to let me know in the comments, and check out my next video right here about why you aren't actually behind in life and why everyone seems to have more money than you, but it actually might not be true. Thank you for watching until the end. See you in the next video.